Thank you so much for having me, everyone. This is a great honor for me. I big fan of Brazil. Last time I was in Brazil was in 2014 during the World Cup. I was there in Rio, and it was a wonderful experience. I fell in love with the country. Great people, great food, great atmosphere. It was a wonderful yeah, wonderful tournament. I didn't stay for the full World Cup, but for the first 2 weeks, which is always the best time to go into World Cup, I think, because at that point every team is there. Nobody has been beaten yet, so everyone's happy. So it was really great. So thank you for having me, and thank you for having me for this great conference. I've been listening now to some of the presenters, and I could see the slides and some of the translations there. So obviously this is a high quality conference, and the workshop we just did a couple of hours ago, great questions there too. So thank you for having me. My name is Jorgen Hesselberg, and what I wanted to talk about today was unlocking agility at the enterprise level, and I wanted to try to make it positive. I think very often we talk about all the things that can go wrong, and yes, there's obviously a lot of things that can go wrong. We saw that in my previous workshop, but there's also a lot of things that actually go right, and there are signs that tell you whether or not you're on the right track when it comes to enterprise agility, agility at the organizational level. So my talk is really about that. I wanted to give you something concrete, something real, something that you can take home to your own company and ask yourself, are we doing these things? Can we see these things in our company today? That's essentially what I would like to have you come out of this with. So you can actually go back to your own company and say, all right, Jorgen talked about these 7 signs. I want to see if we're actually seeing these 7 signs in our company today, because those are, in my experience, those are clear signs that you're on your path to unlocking agility. So,
Caraca.
so
Tá usando
before,
alguma coisa aí,
no,
Chico?
I hope this works okay. Before we go there, now what I wanted to do now is to do a quick little survey, and we'll see if this works. Because I think it would be interesting to kind of see how. Let's see if you can see the screen here. If I click on this, can you see my screen now? I'm hoping you can see Mentimeter. What I would love for you to do now is take the survey before we move on, because I'd love to see your take on this, and see what your first thoughts are when you hear agile transformation. What is it that you're thinking when you hear agile transformation? Is it something that's going through your mind? What are your first thoughts? And to access this, just simply go to menti.com. You can see that on the top of the screen here, menti.com, and use the code 7654290. So 7654290, and then simply just enter whatever comes to mind when you hear the words agile transformation, because we've been talking a lot about that, and I know there's a lot of hype around it sometimes, but I'd like to sort of become a little bit of a psychologist and hear what's going through your mind. And I see some things already pop up. Culture, I get that one. Cultura, value, adaptation, sorcery. I love that. That's really good. New customer experience, revolution. Yes, I think that is in many cases needed, a revolution, because simply just changing slightly probably isn't going to be enough. Adaptation, sharing, faster. Yes, that's certainly something we see. People want to try to decrease the time it takes to go from concept to cash. Simplicity, I think, is what I saw there. That's probably coming from Ari's talk earlier. I thought that was really great. I think that's exactly true. Mind change, yes, we will definitely go through that. This is right. Hard, yeah. This is not easy stuff. I think that's one of those things that we find out as we're doing another transformation. This is not easy stuff. It's not simply something you implement. Not as easy as that. So let me go to share the other screen again. But I really appreciate you sharing that information with me, because I think this is one of those things that's now, a lot of people talk about this and they think it is hype, and this is no longer the case. I think we all realize now that this is no longer a nice to have. This is a must have. And part of what I think is really important to note is that there used to be that, change is constant. Everyone talks about that. And I think that's true. There was always change. But I think one thing that is different now is that the clock speed is accelerating. The rate of change is accelerating greatly. If you go back in time, if you think about Homo sapiens, when we came on this planet and invented language about 50,000 years ago, if you fast forward when Homo sapiens invented language and go another 1,000 years in the future from that time, not that much had happened. There wasn't that much innovation that happened in thousands of years when we first entered the planet. If you go back to say 2,000 years for years ago, and you go another 500 years ahead of that, not much things had changed. But if you look at the last 50 years, just go back 50 years, and you look at what's going on from 1960 and 1970 and up to now, and you think of all the things that we've done as a human race, it's pretty amazing. We invented the internet. We have electric cars. We have smartphones. We have computers. We have the polio vaccine. We have, however you look at this, a lot of change has happened in the last 50 years, and it's happening faster and faster and faster. And this is, of course, what's happening in the world today. VUCA, which is something we've been talking about before and throughout this conference, it's a real thing. This is something that executives are struggling with right now. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. We're seeing that things are happening faster. Outcomes are harder to predict. There's no clear cause and effect, and we can see there's so many unknowns. So this VUCA thing that people have been talking about is very real. This is very concrete. This is no longer a nice to have. This is a must have. And in many ways, I think COVID, which is one of the themes of today, it definitely has accelerated that process and made that a lot more clear to everyone. If you think about organizations, we understand now that there's no sustainable competitive advantage. It used to be a time when you could be a large organization and you could create moats or barriers to entry, and you could essentially create a product and say, good luck, nobody's going to compete with me. That is no longer the case. There is no sustainable competitive advantage anymore. Change is not optional. We're finding out now that simply going down a certain path just because you can isn't enough, because you are going to be disrupted unless you disrupt yourself. Executives, and this is actually an old stat that I have that's about 18 months old, when they were looked upon in a poll by McKinsey, executives were saying around 9 out of 10 were saying that organizational agility was at the top of their strategic initiatives. So looking at all the executives that McKinsey is working on, when they did a survey, they found that among 9 out of 10 executives, organizational agility was the top strategic priority. Well, I bet if we ask them this now, I think that is going to be even more so. I think they're going to say that agility and the idea of adapting to change is probably the most important thing. COVID have definitely made that very clear. And there are great benefits of business agility. Let's be honest and true about that. Yes, it's very hard, but there are real benefits to agility when you make it happen. I'll give you a couple of examples right now. Faster execution. That is one very clear benefit of business agility. Here, this is a company based in Berlin. That's where their headquarters is now. That company, which I was involved in as well, were able to go from speed to cash. If you think about when they started to make a change to when they actually delivered, they went from 36 months to 6 weeks in terms of execution. Imagine that, going from concept to cash from 36 months to 6 months. That is fast. We were able to do that working for here. Increase customer focus. This is an example from a company in ING, which is based in Belgium. That company started focusing on customer a lot more as part of their agile transformation. And what they were able to do by focusing on the customer and kind of looking at themselves as a software company with a financial services arm rather than a financial services company, they were able to not only focus on the customer, but also retain the customer. They were able to retain 30% more customers. And that is huge in terms of what it means for profitability. And then we have Equinor. This is a Norwegian company, an energy company. What they decided to do was to do more of the important things and less of those things that weren't so important. So they actually focused a lot more in terms of their strategy. And by simply doing less of the things that don't matter so much, they were able to increase their profitability. This is about 7 or 8 months old now, but what they were able to say was that in the next 2 years, they're able to amass the same amount of profits as they did in the previous 17 years. I'll say that one more time because I think that's pretty amazing. In the next 2 years, their profits are projected to be equivalent to the previous 17 years. Just imagine that. And that's just because they focus their efforts a lot more as part of an agile transformation. And Nokia, I got to talk about Nokia. I mean, I still have my heart thinking of Nokia. My first phone was a Nokia phone. A lot of you probably think that Nokia is dead, but they really are not. Today, Nokia is a leader in 5G technology. And I think we'll hear a lot more about them. They're about 150 years old. They're not going to go away. Nokia, when they were going through the struggles that they were going through, what they decided to do was to focus on being more humane, focus more on their employees because they had no choice. Because as that stock went down, you could see other companies like Google, like Facebook, like Ericsson, a lot of their competition was trying to take their best employees. So what they did is they decided then to focus on being more humane and focus more on their employee engagement. And because of that, they were able to actually retain their best employees and decrease their attrition rate, which is pretty amazing when you're thinking about it. When you are in hard times, it's really hard to keep your best people. And Nokia was able to do that as part of their agile transformation. So yes, this actually works. And we know that it has great benefits, but it's so darn hard. That's the thing. Agility at the enterprise level is not trivial. It's really, really hard to do it. And there's a couple of reasons why it fails. And we keep seeing that again and again. And this has at least been my experience. The number one reason why agility fails, at least when you think about the enterprise level, is this one here. And I think Ari said the same thing. So I'm really glad to hear he agrees with me on this one. Lack of executive commitment and support. If you don't have executive support, doing any type of agile enterprise transformation is going to be very, very hard. It's going to be an uphill battle. And I'm not talking about VP support or director level support. I'm talking C-level support, ideally CEO level support. That's the kind of support you need to make sure you can make the changes that is necessary. And here's another thing that I see again and again, which is a problem: believing we're done. What happens with Agile, which is great, is that once you start to change the way you work, you will see some benefits pretty immediately. I mean, you just reduce your WIP limit, or let's say you focus on shorter batch sizes, for instance, you will see benefits right away. That's problem because very often when you see those benefits, people will say, oh, look at us, we're agile, we're done, we did it, mission accomplished. That, of course, is not the case. When we're talking about agility, when we're talking about agile, it's something we become more of. It's not something you become. It's something you continue to do. That journey is never over. So believing you're done could be actually one of the main reasons why these transformations fail. And it happens because we're actually making some great progress on our way. And the third thing is actually going back to progress. And when I talk about progress, I mean meaningful progress, making sure that we can link our agile transformation to a real business problem. We're not doing agile because it's cool. We're not doing it because the competition does it. We're not doing it because someone told us that this is the latest thing. We're doing it because it's solving a meaningful problem for the business. And what we need to do is make sure we can show that we're actually making progress towards those goals. And if we don't show that progress, if we don't measure how we do over time and show that we're making progress, then I think that's one of the main reasons why agile transformations fail. Because you do have a honeymoon period right away. When you first start, everyone's excited and everything's going great. But then after a while, after 3 to 6 to 9 months, executives are going to say, well, we have a lot of coaches here. We have these new frameworks. We got these new terms. What are we getting out of this? What's the benefit? And that's when we got to show, well, hey, we can look at our lead time. We can look at our defects going down. We can look at our NPS scores. We can look at our customer satisfaction and our sales go up. These kind of things need to be tracked also. So make sure that there's a link there between the operations and the business strategy. So, but this was supposed to be a positive talk. So what we're going to talk about today are not the reasons why it fails. We're going to talk about the reasons how we know that we're making progress. So I'm going to give you 7 signs that I have seen are very concrete signs that you're on the right track. And if you see these signs in your own organization, I can tell you that you are on your path towards unlocking agility. So I'll go through those 7 signs with you, and then we'll see if you can test them yourself if you try this in your own organization. And you can maybe ask your executives, why are we not doing this if you're seeing some challenges? So let's start with the first sign. Here's sign number 1. I always do this when I go and I talk with executives, when I talk with leaders, and they want me to help them become more agile. I always ask them this question: would you rather be right, or do you want to be successful? And that sounds like a simple question, but it's actually quite complicated because very often they don't always want to be successful. In fact, very often they want to be right. And that question is a really important question to answer honestly. Here's an example that I saw firsthand. Stephen Elop was the CEO of Nokia from 2010 to 2014. I was fortunate enough to work with him really closely as we were doing our agile transformation. And we were doing quite well for a long time. Then Stephen started to make some changes from a strategic perspective. And I understand exactly why he did it. There was this fruit company from California that came out with a phone called the iPhone. And he had to do something to try to combat that from a strategic perspective. What he did was to go from Symbian, which was the operating system that Nokia used, to Windows Phone, which was Microsoft's system. Microsoft, of course, didn't have so much success in mobile space up to this point. Stephen Edop came from Microsoft, but he thought that that's the way to go. And he decided to do basically a burn all bridges type of approach. He said, this is the way we're going. We're burning all the bridges. We're on a burning platform, and we're going to go all the way on Windows Phone. So that's what he did. Now, what started to happen since we were agile, we actually used metrics a lot. We looked at measurements, and we started to see that the results weren't really coming in the way we hoped. We were seeing that sales of those Nokia phones weren't really working. And more disturbingly, we saw that customers weren't really happy with the phones because we didn't have the apps that you needed to have. We didn't have Instagram, for instance. We didn't have the Bank of America app, for instance. So all these things that customers wanted in a smartphone, we didn't have that. Sales went down. We talked to Steven and we said, hey, Steven, is this maybe a chance for us to reevaluate and maybe change our strategy? And he said, nope, we're staying the course. Well, okay, we tried a little longer, kept going down the path. But after a while, we checked with him again and we said, you know what? We're losing market share in Europe. We're losing market share in South America. We're losing market share everywhere except for Africa. For some reason, we were still doing pretty good there. And we told him, should we try to adjust? Maybe we should look at Android. And he said, no, we're staying the course. He kept going until we went from 40% market share down to about 3% market share when Nokia ultimately was sold to Microsoft. He wanted to be right. He didn't necessarily care about being successful. It was his strategy. He wanted to go down that route. He didn't want to change. Now, contrast this with Donna Potts McKinsey. This is an HR director at Navtech, which is another company I work with as we were doing a transformation. She was terrified as we were doing an agile transformation because she was the head of HR. And she said to me, I don't know how to do this. I am terrified. I am trained as a traditional HR leader. I'm not sure what this means when it comes to role portraits or compensation schemes or recruiting strategies. All those kind of things are very foreign to me. So, how does this look in an agile world? What I told her is I said, Donna, tell people that. Be honest with them and tell them that you don't know exactly what this looks like yet, but also let them know that you're on board and let them know that you support them. And that's exactly what she did. She stood in front of 200 people in a town hall meeting and she said, I am excited about going agile for Navtech. I can't tell you exactly how it looks, and I can't tell you exactly how your roles are going to change, but I can tell you that I'm 100% behind you and I'm going to learn together with you. And you know what? That made such a big difference because people could understand that she was honest, her heart was in it, and she wanted to be successful. She wasn't really caring about whether she was right. It was about being successful. In fact, she probably would be wrong quite a few times. That's part of agility. So that's number one. Look for that. Do you want to be right or do you want to be successful? Here's another one. This is about distributing responsibility and really not just responsibility, but also incentives. How do we reward people? So here's an example. This is from a company that I was working with in Norway. And I was talking to an executive there and he said, hey, I see what you're doing. I like what's going on, but you're asking me here to give up 25% of my salary. And I said to him, well, what do you mean? Well, I see what you're saying. You're saying optimize for the whole. You're saying that we should collaborate better together. I get that. But you're ultimately asking me to give up a lot of my salary because what's happening right now is that I'm working on a certain project and I'm looking at my colleagues who's in this other sector, this other value stream. And I know that the best thing I could do right now for the organization and what would be the right thing for agility would be if we actually focused on the most important thing for the organization, which is actually not my project, but it's hers. And I should let her take some of my people and we should get her stuff done first. I know that's the right thing to do. But if I do that, I won't meet the goals that are set for my sector. And if I don't meet those goals, I'm not going to get my bonus. If I don't get my bonus, I'm not going to get my 25%. And that means I'm not going to have a summer vacation with my family this year. So that's a pretty tough thing you're asking me to do here. And you know what? I can't blame him. I mean, he has a good point. When we have reward structures, when we are set up in a way where we are ultimately making it difficult for people to do the right thing, that's something that actually makes it really hard for us to do agility, to make any type of enterprise agility happen. So make sure we look at how we distribute responsibility. Make sure we make it easy to help someone else so that actually the organization can optimize for the whole and not for each silo. You'll see a lot of that in organizations that are trying to go agile. So that's another thing to look at. Number three, here's another thing you should look for. And I know this is hard sometimes, aiming for good enough certainty. We don't want to be perfect, but we want to aim for good enough. And sometimes people think that's sloppy, but that's not what we mean here. We're looking for enough information to make good decisions. Here's a quote that I like from Jeff Bezos. He wrote this in the letter to shareholders. He said, decisions should be made with about 70% of the information you wish you had. If you wait for 90%, you're too slow. Isn't that great? But he's essentially saying that it, it's very important to not wait too long. The time it takes to make a decision is actually more expensive than recovering from a mistake. Jeff Bezos understood that and he made that very clear. He understands that especially in a complex environment, the environment that we are in now, it's almost impossible to get all the information. And if we wait too long to try to capture everything, we're going to wait too long and actually not do anything at all. So he's saying just get enough information that you can make a decision. He's estimating at about 70%. That's enough because the cost of delay is too high. So I think that's a really important point. Aiming for good enough. We're not going for perfection, we're going for excellence. 70% of that information is plenty, so you can avoid analysis paralysis. So that was number three. Here's number four. Appreciate the importance of doing less work at once. This is something I see all the time. Those organizations that do it well, they understand that importance. They understand organizational whip and they do something about it. This is critical for agility. Here's an example. Let me give you a little bit of old school cool to show you what I mean. The graph I'm showing you here is from Kingman's Law. This is from John Kingman, who comes back from the 1960s in queuing theory. And what he was able to find was that in areas of large degrees of uncertainty, what's happening is that every time you increase utilization or every time you increase your WIP, you will more than double waiting times. So as you get to about 85 or 90% of utilization, wait times will double every time you increase them by 4 or 5%. So that means that every time you add another piece of work to an organization that's already filled with work, you're going to increase wait times even more to the point that they get nothing done. This is something you could see all the time. For instance, in maybe your own computer, if you have too many tabs going on, for instance, you will see your CPU, your microprocessor will be at about 95% utilization. What happens to your computer then? It pretty much shuts down. Nothing gets done. The same thing happens in organizations. When you do too many things at once, wait times will increase super linearly. They will increase at an exponential rate, which means that nothing gets done. You're doing too many things at once. This is not just true at the personal level or at the team level, it's also true more so at the organizational level. Organizations that want to be agile, they understand that this is a real problem. Steve Jobs, for instance, who I would say in many cases is not the most agile person in the world, but one thing he really understood was focus. One thing that he would do every year, he would get about 100 of his top executives together and he would say, let's go to an offsite, let's go away from the office, and let's focus on the top 10 things we're going to do for the next year. And you can imagine how this would be. This would be all these senior VPs and these executives at Apple, and they would all fight over their own initiatives and their own projects. And they would all sort of say, oh, mine's more important and this is more important. And he said, well, I want you to get it down to about 10 projects. So they would fight it over. And ultimately, they would come back to Steve and they would say, hey, we found the top 10. Then he would go over and he would say, all right, thank you for that. Now we're going to cut the bottom 7. We're doing 3 things. That's focus. That's what Steve Jobs would do. That's really important because when you're able to focus your efforts that way, you can get things done much, much quicker. Quality goes up, customer satisfaction goes up. You're just a lot more focused and you're a lot more nimble in your execution strategy. This goes really well with this understanding of cost of delay. I hope this is a concept that you heard of because this is critical to understanding the economics of your decision. Cost of delay was a concept that came up with Don Reinertsen. Don Reinertsen is a brilliant individual. I met him a couple of times. He's written a really important book that I will talk to you about a little bit later. Um, it's called Principles of Product Development Flow. He's the person who came up with this concept. Cost of delay is essentially the price of life cycle profits, the cost, the economic cost of delay for life cycle profits. And what he's saying is that it's essentially the cost of not having something in production. What does it cost you when something is not there? And how can you then quantify the cost of that at the organizational level? So this may sound a little esoteric, but let me show you. Here's actually a real graph that I used in one of my projects. And typically what I do when I work with large enterprises is that I like to talk to a lot of people around their projects and initiatives and start to track them. And what we try to do is to estimate the cost of delay. Like how much would it cost us to not have this particular initiative in production? What does it cost us every week? And you know, you might not be completely precise when it comes to this calculation, but you can be pretty accurate, especially if you involve finance. They can tell you that, if this particular project is not in production, we're going to lose $2 million every month. So that's what we did. And what we did is we tracked all those projects, and you can see those there on the horizontal axis. And then we looked at the cost of delay, which is measured on the vertical axis. And what you will see, and this has now happened to me 3 or 4 times in a row, so I know this is more of a pattern than anything else, is that 80% of the cost of delay is going to be focused around 20% of the projects. 80% of the cost of delay is in 20% of the projects. Now, this is not sorted by priority. This is sorted by cost of delay. The priority is not the same as the cost of delay very often. So what you will see is that you will have projects that have a very low cost of delay, competing for resources and creating dependencies with projects with a large cost of delay. And if you don't understand work in progress limits, WIP limits that we talked about, then you do all of these things at once, which is typically what happens, which means nothing gets done. So what I'm proposing here and what I've been seeing with large organizations that do this well is that they take an economic perspective. They say, this is not about politics. It's not about some pet project for some executive. We do this because we look at what has the largest economic impact to us as an organization, and then we work on those and not the rest. This is exactly what Equinor did in the example I showed you earlier. So this is really important. We're at number 6 now, and this is a good one too. This can be hard for us sometimes because a lot of us have gone to school for many years. We have college degrees. We consider ourselves professionals, and part of being a professional is that we tend to have a certain level of control over things. At least we like to think we do, and that's part of the problem. I think what we need to do, and what agile organizations do, is they learn to let go of that illusion. They understand that it's not possible to create a flawless system. It's not possible to create something that never fails or that you have control of all the time. Instead, it's actually better to plan to fail and then to recover rather than trying to prevent failure in the first place. That can be a little bit hard, but it's absolutely critical for enterprise agility. Here's an example. Chaos Monkey. I don't know if you heard of this concept, but Chaos Monkey is a concept that comes from Netflix. Netflix is obviously, I'm sure everyone has heard of Netflix. They're global, great company, SaaS company. One of the things that they do is they have this concept of Chaos Monkey, which essentially is that they are intentionally breaking down certain parts of their network, certain parts of their critical infrastructure randomly at times because they want to see in production, by the way, whether or not the teams are optimized to recover quickly from this change. So if something goes down, how quickly can we recover without a catastrophic failure? Isn't that interesting? So instead of waiting until something goes wrong and not know how to deal with it, they are intentionally creating little failures to make sure the system is resilient, not necessarily robust in the sense that it never fails, but that it very quickly recovers when, not if, but when failure happens. That's the concept of the chaos monkey, and that's what they do so well at Netflix. Another thing you should look at when it comes to agility at the organization: can you deal with things like failure, and can you quickly recover rather than trying to create some system that never fails? Because that is actually creating fragility, not agility. Here's the 7th sign. This is the one thing that I also think you should look at, which is tricky for a lot of organizations to do because it isn't so obvious. But this is coming from Russell Ackoff, which is another hero of mine from the 1960s. He was a great system thinker. And one of the things that he said was that we need to recognize that a system is a product of its interactions. It's a product not of each individual team in each individual department. It's a product of the interactions between those departments and those teams. And that, I think, is pretty profound. In the beginning, this may sound a little bit obtuse and a little bit esoteric, but I'm going to give you an example that I think will make this pretty clear to you. This is from a project that I was working on. And I know there's a lot of dots here, but I'll try to explain what this is. Essentially, what you see here is you see the weeks, the number of weeks that this project was going on. And then I try to sort of map the phases that we were going through, the different departments, the different teams that were involved. And if you look at this, you can see that every time we were actually doing something that created value against this particular thing that we were working on, which is a software initiative, then I have a green dot. And every time we were waiting or actually not doing anything related to this particular project, you see a red dot. And as you can see, there's a lot of red dots here. But then if you look at this little part here, you see the agile efforts. This is, of course, the teams. The teams are agile. That's what they say, right? They're working, they're doing their scrum, they're doing Kanban, they're doing whatever, they're doing safe even. But what you're seeing here is that all the other parts are doing lots of handovers. And probably worse than anything else, we don't really see the customer. We don't really do any connection with the customer until we get to week 45 and 46. How agile is that? So this is a problem that happens all the time. We don't focus on the interactions between the different teams. We focus on simply the teams themselves. So if you think about what happens very often when you have an agile coach, and an organization hires an agile coach, where do they have that agile coach work? Well, with the teams. They're working with the agile teams, right? Where do you think that agile coach could have the greatest level of impact? Probably by working on one of those red dots, not the green dots. They're already doing fairly well there. Yeah, I'm sure there's other things they can do to get better, but the real value and the real impact is in the red dots, because that's areas that we haven't even thought about in terms of optimizing for the whole. So that's what we have to understand. What we're trying to optimize for here is to understand that the system here is a product of the interactions. It's not simply about the teams themselves. So those are the 7 things. What I wanted to do now is try to open up another Menti to see if I can get this done. And I'm going to try to see if I can have you look at these 7 signs that I just showed you and see if you can respond to this Menti. You just have to go to menti.com again and then type in the code 411271. That's www.menti.com. Then use the code 411271 and then tell me, among the 7 signs that I went through, which of those is the least likely to be observed in your organization? So which of these do you not think that you can see in your own organization? Because that's a really good sign that you're actually not on the right path. Some of these things can be really tricky. And this takes a level of maturity that sometimes could take a while for organizations. So let me take a few minutes to see what people are saying. You could actually select a couple if you see a lot of them. So we'll see what people are seeing. So far, recognizing that a system is the product of its interactions are getting some votes, and I can totally see that. It's really hard for people to get that one. Oh, learning to let go of control is another one that's coming up. It's really hard for us, right? I mean, imagine we went to school for so long. We have gotten these fancy titles. We're making all this money, and now we're supposed to sort of learn that we don't have control. I mean, that's really intimidating. Um, and in fact, we probably see this in leadership right now. If you think about COVID, I think if you look at those countries that have done really well, those are countries that have leaders who are humble, who understand that they don't actually have control. And instead of pretending that we know what to do, we actually say, you know what? Let's be a little bit conservative and careful and test our assumptions before we make proclamations such as, this is a virus that's going to go away, or this virus is just the flu. Let's actually test whether that's the truth first and understand that we don't have control, because this is a very fluid environment. Here's some other ones. Oh, the importance of doing less work at once. That's pretty high, and I see that a lot. Organizational work in progress. Honestly, I think if you were to do one thing, if you were to slash your organizational work in progress with 30 to 40%, just that alone would give you a great degree of agility. Just doing less work at once would help you tremendously, because it would help you optimize. Let's see, what else do I see? Aiming for good enough certainty. Yeah, that didn't get too many votes there. Distributing responsibility and incentives. Yes, this is another problem. This is why HR is really important too, right? When it comes to incentives, when it comes to how we recognize people across the organization. This is not a product management thing. It's not an engineering thing. It's not a technical thing. It's an organizational thing. So we need HR to be part of this too. And yeah, do you want to be right or successful? It's getting a couple of votes, but yeah, looks like here learning to let go of control seems to be the lead, and I can totally see that. This is why this is hard. So let me switch back and then see if we can go back to the PowerPoint that we were working on, which is here. What I hope that you can see is that when it comes to organizational agility, we have to think about the whole organization. this is not simply something we do at the team level. It takes a holistic approach. So what we got to do is we have to focus on dimensions of agility, technology. And when I talk about technology in my book, I talk about methods, tools, techniques, things that help you do things better. Scrum is a technology. XP is a technology. Jira is a technology. But these are the kind of things you see. And very often people do those things only, and that's a big mistake. But yes, you do need to focus on the technology piece. You focus on the organizational design. How are we organized? Do we optimize for flow? How do we make sure that we have cross-team collaboration? How do we do this remotely or physically? Even more important now than ever. People, how can we create engagement in our people? How can we create psychological safety so that they can tell the truth when something is happening? How can we create pride in their work and they can make decisions without management telling them what to do? How do we optimize for the team and not individuals? All important parts. How about leadership? How do we create a growth mindset where leaders can articulate a clear sense of purpose and at the same time be very clear on making sure that making a mistake is okay? Failure is not something that we should punish. How do we create that in our leadership? What kind of language do our leaders use? And ultimately, culture, which of course is making all of this tied together. What is the mindset that somebody was mentioning? How does that mindset permeate itself throughout the organization? How can we become a learning organization that continuously learns how we work and become better today than we were yesterday? That, at the end of the day, is what agility is all about. So a couple of things I want to leave you with. First, make sure that you understand why you want to be more agile. I think it's pretty clear now, and we've seen many failures of this, is that this is not easy. So when you're trying to be more agile, understand why you're doing it. This is not something you should do because everyone else is doing it or because it's cool. You should do it because it is a strategic imperative. So understand the why behind it. Number two, everything agile is great and everything great is agile is not a very great thing to say. It doesn't mean anything. What you have to understand is that there are certain environments where agility is not the way to go. So I want you to think about that. If you're trying to optimize for cost, for instance, agility is perhaps not where you want to go. But if you're looking to optimize for speed or for quality or even for adaptability, then yes, absolutely agility is the way to go. So make sure your operational strategy, which is the way you're agile or not, aligns with your business strategy. And lastly, agile is not something you become, it's something you become more of. It's a continuous journey. It's not a framework, it's not a solution. It's something that you continuously do. You get better every single day. You're better today than you were yesterday. It's something you become more of. Here's some of the resources that I've been using. There's lots of others too, but here's some of the ones that I've been using. I did put my own book in there, so I know that's probably bad form, but I still think it would be useful if you're in my shoes and have gone through a number of these type of transformations. I think that could be useful. So I recommend you look at those. I'll make these slides available later on. And then here, just a couple of things. If you want to try to find out how agile you are or your organization, you can go to comparativeagility.com and try that with a free account. Send me any questions that you have per email. I'm very open to that. I'm kind of a nerd if you haven't guessed this by now. So I'm very excited about this kind of stuff. So if you want to talk, just send me an email. And if you are interested in my book, it's available on Amazon and every other bookseller out there. I hope you like it. You can see it there on Agility, unlockingagility.com. So that's all I had. Now I have some time for some Q&A. So I'll stop sharing and then we'll see if maybe there's some questions that are coming my way. But thank you. That's it's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Jorgen.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to hear you.
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear me. I hope it sounded okay with the translation and everything. Poor translator. I talked a lot, so I feel sorry for the translator.
No problem, no problem. I have a few minutes to discuss about some questions.
Please.
Okay. I have a question from Rodrigo. Rodrigo, are these 7 signs universal and globally accepted by leadership across the world? And are there cultural aspects and bias that influences an agile transformation?
Yeah, there's sort of two questions there. I think they're
Yeah.
both valid. Let's say the first one, those 7 signs, there's nothing scientific about these 7 signs other than that I have kept seeing them again and again when I go to successful companies who have done this. Now, it's not to say that there might not be 8 or maybe 9, but when I look at other organizations that have been able to do this, and I work with quite a few myself, these things keep popping up. I keep seeing that they do these kind of things well. So what I was trying to do is to try to say, how about I distill this into 7 sort of simple things that we can test ourselves with our own organizations? And those are the things that I kept seeing. Not to say that there might not be another one, but that's at least the one that I've been keeping to see. When it comes to the other question around culture, absolutely. Now I think you're talking things not just organizational culture, but also culture from a geographical perspective. And absolutely, there are pros and cons of each culture. There are certain cultures that will give you a little bit in terms of agility, and others that will take some away. And I think one thing that we have learned is that this whole idea of failure, the whole idea of psychological safety, is critical to agility. So, in organizations where you don't have a lot of room to grow, so to speak, where failure is not an option, or even in culture where the power distance is pretty high, then I think it is harder. So without being ethnocentric, I would say that you know I've worked with some organizations in India, for instance, where there's a lot of distance between the leader and the person working on the floor. These things can be a little trickier unless the executive is on board, and that's why this is number one for me. If the executive is on board and if the leader buys into this, that's going to be a lot easier, in fact, because then everyone says, oh, okay, in that case I can make mistakes now because the leader says it's okay. So yes, there's definitely cultural elements to this, but that can work for you and against you. You just have to be aware of the culture that you're in.
And understand this bias and understand this, the all cultural is probably the way that the companies adopting agility. It's the first thing can help people transpoint these challenges. We have another question. Rafael, the most, oops, the most difficult thing in this process is human behavior and resistance. What can be done to engage people and techniques to mitigate resistance from people? That's a $1 million question. Feel free.
Yes. It's a great question. Human resistance to change, honestly, I think it's part of our DNA. I think anyone who says that I love change, I think they are partly lying, because honestly, everyone is a little bit resistant to change. It's part of our job, so to speak, as humans, to try to find equilibrium. We want to try something that we're comfortable with. So when things are not feeling right, if things are different, then we try to adapt to that so that we can kind of keep stable. So I think that's part of our human nature. But that all being said, I think what we're looking at here is sort of coming to the acceptance that just staying where things are probably is actually worse than change. And I think part of that is our job as leaders is to communicate what's in it for me. So let me give you an example. I had a leader that I was working with. This was at Nokia, and he was an engineering leader, and he had 100 120 developers working for him, and he had a lot of power because of that, because all these people had huge salaries, and the more people you have and bigger your budget and the more power you have. And as we were going agile, we were looking to actually take these developers and have them actually organized in value streams, which meant that he was no longer going to control all these people. And that was really hard for him. In the beginning, he really worked against this. But once he understood why we were doing it, and once he understood that our executives, our C-level, was on board with this, he understood this is probably in my best interest for me to get on board and understand this, because if I do, then I'm going to be able to actually do much better in my career. And that's what he did. So he got another job. Instead of being a head of development, he was now head of a value stream. So that means he had a P&L responsibility. He had developers, he had testers, he had product management, he had marketing, he had sales. I mean, he became actually more influential, but different from before. And that worked for him. But, you know, we did have to sort of explain to him why this would actually be a benefit to him. That all being said, there are some people who are not going to make the change. And I would be lying to you if I said that was the case. I have worked with people who have ultimately resisted every single step we did. And we got to the point where we as an organization have to make a decision. Are we okay with this? And if we say yes to that, we're sending a signal that says we're not really serious. Or do we actually take action? And that's what we did. We said, hey, we're actually going agile. If this is not something you want to do, we recommend you work somewhere else. And we'll be happy to find a job for you. But you know, if you're on board here, you're gonna have to work with us.
Yeah, this is not simple to.
No, not simple. Not simple.
It's need to be treated as a complex challenge.
Yeah, and I think it's our
There is
job
no
as
silver
change
bullet
leaders.
for it.
No silver bullet, but it's
Yeah,
our job also as change leaders to help them in terms of training, coaching,
yeah,
resources. You know, even resistors, we need to try to help them.
yeah, yeah.
And ultimately, if they
Yeah.
don't want to do it, then that's okay.
This question probably will talk about that 3 more hours.
Yes, yeah, you're right. It's a core question to agility.
Yeah, with beer,
It's even more fun with beer.
much more fun. In respect to the other finalists, Jorgen, I have the last question. Okay, we have a lot of questions for you in the QA and the chat. I can send you this question. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
No problem.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
problem.
It's really interesting questions the people giving us. Beatriz Figueiredo has a great question. Hi, Jorgen. Congrats for your talk. Great
Thank you.
approach. My question is, having been leading many different agile transformation projects, have you seen more barriers in some cultures than others? That's a great question. I mean, project may be more successful depending on the local culture. You give us the India example, and any examples to share?
Yes, no, and she's completely right. There are different barriers depending on the culture. I would say one thing, for instance, in Norway, you know, where I live now, and I have a couple of clients there that are pretty large. The thing there that's kind of interesting is that they are very collaborative, and there's very little power distance, so that you know you have sort of a leader, and then everyone else can definitely challenge that leader without any fear. That's great, but it also has some challenges, because if we're trying to say, all right, we're trying to look at a strategy here to become more agile, here's kind of where we're going. What I saw that is very often is that there was a lot of talk around, okay, well, how are we gonna do this? Everyone wants to have a say, and instead of having a leader kind of setting a strategy and saying, okay, here's the high level plan. That doesn't mean we can't change it, but here's the direction. Everyone wanted a say in it, and it became, what can I say, a little bit too much discussion sometimes, because at the end of the day you need a product owner, you need someone who can kind of be the lead in this. So that was the flip side of psychological safety. They almost had too much of it. Of course, in the US, I have been through scenarios there where I've seen the other side of it, where a leader would go in and say, we're going to be agile, and oh, by the way, we're doing a framework. So they just say, I'm going to bring in these consultants and we're going to do a framework. That I'm not sure is the way to go either, because then you're not having the organization be part of the change. You're just kind of pushing it down, and you're not actually creating real change. You're just putting a framework on top of dysfunction. So, you know, that doesn't work so well either. So it's sort of really, I think the job of the change leader is to recognize the context that you're in, understand the culture with all its pros and cons, and then try to adopt and tailor a structure that works for that culture. And then do lots of experiments. You don't have all the answers, and you'll see that in my book as well. I'm not telling you do A, B, C, D. I say find out what you're trying to solve, have an approach for it, test your assumptions along the way, and then adapt as you see what works and what doesn't. So it's not easy, but it works.
Wonderful, Jorgen. It's a great insight. It's a great insight.
Good
Jorgen,
question.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
You'll talk in the next week.
Yes, we'll talk next
Okay.
week. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much for the questions. These were really awesome. I really appreciate you putting this on. This is an amazing event, and to make it free
Thank
with
you.
all these
Thank
great
you. Yeah,
content,
yeah.
I think is really
Free.
great.
It's really free. Thank
Thank you so
you,
much.
Jorgen. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye, everybody.